to sit on the front row if you don't want to. Welcome to the first class. There'll be more people coming at various times. Some people couldn't be here tonight. They will be here other nights. But because of the recording capability, you can always, if you can't get here, you can watch what we speak about online, and you can get all the materials online. And those folks who will be watching this at another time later, who aren't in the room, will be able to partake of the same thing, and hopefully you'll be hearing from them online on the forum that we have. Tonight I want to spend a little bit of time talking about logistics, and we can answer questions in terms of just making sure we get rolling, and also give you a context for why we're offering this kind of class in this kind of way, and what its direction is, and some of its function, and hopefully some of its fruit. Then we'll speak about the particular stepping stone that is for this first class, and for your first request or prompt for writing, and a little bit about where we'll go next, and what the whole arc of this particular path looks like. That sound okay? All right. It's actually traditional to begin a meeting of a Sangha, especially when you're doing a service, and we're not doing a formal service, but we are of service in the world, to dedicate the merit of what we're doing. And there's a very brief, and I think to the point, dedication of merit that I like, that comes from the more traditional liturgy. And sometimes it's chanted this way: may our intention equally permeate every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. May our intention equally permeate every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. So think for just a moment, what is your intention? And you need an answer right now. I'd like you to write about it in a while, but think about, what is your intention for showing up here in the middle of rush hour on a cold Thursday evening, for signing up, for some of you braving a collaborative website. Everybody has their challenges in various ways. What is your intention? May our intention equally permeate every being and every place with the true merit of Buddha's way. So what's the merit of Buddha's way? Another question will be investigating. What does that mean to you? And how are these linked? Our intention and Buddha's way. That's the path. And that's what we're going to be investigating. And one thing I'm going to be doing a little bit is sometimes writing myself, even while we're together. This is a collaborative site. It's just not on the web. Sometimes it's digital, sometimes it's real, but it's collaborative. Because that expresses a core methodology and a core approach to teaching in Appamada. So I want to back up just for a moment, now that I've kind of laid out that deepest intention. But maybe we should learn this together. Can you remember it? Okay, those of you that know it, some of you already know it. Let's say it together, and those of you that don't worry about it, you'll get it. And let's do a little bit of formality. May our intention equally permeate every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. May our intention equally permeate every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. True Buddhist fashion. May our intention equally permeate every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. And I hope you would want your intention to be robust, like that bell, not small. So I want to talk just for a moment about part of my intention, and then I'm going to talk with Peg's help about the larger intention, and then we'll talk about the particular stepping stone along the path for tonight. So I began working on this series in some retreats that I did in the last 2 years. And then in the last year, I began writing what I hoped would be a book that I could give people when they first came to practice. Because, you know, a lot of you, you come in and you say, you know, is there something I can read? Or is there some little guide or something that will let me know what this is about or what direction to go? And there are many, many good books on Zen, and there are a lot of good teachings on Buddhism. And there are of a couple of types. And you know this because you're the kind of people that read the books, right? If we got all the books on Buddhist practice and spiritual practice that all of you in this room have read, they wouldn't fit in this room, would they? I mean, I know Ashley's wouldn't, even just her. I told you I'd pick on you. But I'm right, aren't I? Yeah, okay. Because I'm one of them, I know. So you have the books on Buddhism and Buddhist history and Buddhist teaching, just general books, you know, and what has Buddhism been all this time. And you have particular books by particular teachers on something they've studied in depth. You have all the translations that Red Pine has done of sutras. You have particular scholars that have books in all these areas on Buddhism. And then you have an enormous number of books of various luminaries, teachers, like Pema Chodron, Jack Kornfield, and people like that, and their various books they've done, which are really expressions of their teaching, which are incredible. We don't need more books, in a way, because there's plenty of those out there. But what I didn't have is something, when someone came in, they say, now, what is this really? And I could say, read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. It's very inspiring, and it's a classic, but still people would come back and go, okay, so but what do we do? Or you could read Joko's books, which are incredibly challenging and real about everyday practice. But it doesn't seem to give you sort of a coherent arc. It gives you beautiful teachings. And on and on. You know this, right? Okay. But I wanted to, if someone came in, I said, this will give you a little map. It's not the whole thing, but it's something you can follow. Something that has a coherence to it, that has a directionality to it, all of which is an illusion, but it's a necessary one. Because how else are you going to walk along, you know? It's just like GPS. It's just a bunch of digital information. It's not the real thing, but it does help you get there. And it's a function. It's a skillful means. And so I began to notice that the things that I chanted in my traditional training that had something to do with everyday sitting, liturgy, vows, that there were these guideposts from the ancient way that you could use, and they seemed to move in a certain series, if you lined them up in a certain way, they began to unfold a bit of a path. Now, I didn't want to have one more book on Zen history, or Japanese or Chinese Zen. There's plenty of those, and they're well done. But what if we could take those traditional signposts and then unpack them in an everyday way with each other and find out what they mean in our lives now. So we could pay homage to the history and to the teachers and to the lineages from which we come, but support our life. Otherwise, some Zen students, and I've been one at times, you become historians. You're really good at understanding the roots of Buddhism, how it moved into China, mixed with Taoism, how it moved into Japan, moved with Shinto and Confucian, all that, and it became Zen, and then moved into the United States and tried to be Japanese, falsely, and you can understand all that history. But what you end up doing, instead of transforming your life, you begin studying Buddhism. And you become an expert on Buddhism. But Buddhism is irrelevant. Not in general. It's not relevant to the transformation of your life. If you want to study, that's like saying that if you study the history of Christianity, you'd understand the teachings of Jesus. You know the history of Christianity, but you wouldn't understand the lived reality of the teaching. And you could say that about any religion. There's a living reality, but people get trapped or entranced, really, and then trapped a bit by the history, and it's not lived any longer. So I wanted this to be something alive, based on what we received from our previous teachers and ancestors, but something alive. And I wanted it to be relational, something that was a dialogue in present time, about present lives. Not how can we map our lives onto the lives of Dogen, 13th century monasteries in Japan, which basically is taking rules that were set up to keep 13th century adolescent men in line. Well, that doesn't necessarily apply to everyone. It was a really good system for that, but it's not necessarily applicable to your lives. So how could we find a way that it was an expression now, and then we could discover it together? And if we're discovering how it unfolds together, then we're also making it alive in the moment, and that's, rather than a teaching from up here with a teacher, it's more like reaching out and taking someone's hand and saying, let's walk together. You want to do that? And they say that the teachings are passed from warm hand to warm hand. That's what is talked about in the transmission ceremonies, from teacher to student. But it's not just the transmission from teacher to the next teacher. It's actually, that's what connects the Sangha. So this was some of my thinking as I began to write and began to think about what we could actually do together. Another piece has to do with the difference in this particular book about where the center of the voice would be. So I want Peg to speak a little bit about that and about the series, and maybe that'll give you a little more information. I'm going to move the microphone just for a second so she can do that.
So what we're launching is a new book imprint, Appamada imprint, and it's specifically intended to publish books about contemporary practice in a context of ordinary American lives. So not monastic living, not priest path, but contemporary American Zen. And this particular series that this book is part of, and it'll be the second book in the series, is the Liberating Intimacy series, and that specific function of that series is to produce books that engage lay voices and the voices of students, particularly in dialogue with teachers. So the one thing we have, many books by scholars and many books by well-known Zen teachers and Zen masters, but there is a very, very little of the voices of the students. So the first book in the series is a book that's coming out of a class that I taught last fall, non-argumentative rhetoric in Zen. And in that class, each student wrote a chapter about their very first encounter with Zen. So the entire book is just chapters by the students. And the title of it is True Beginner's Mind. So the students did sitting meditation, they wrote, they had classroom conversations, they had online conversations, and they had an opportunity to really discover for themselves the very beginnings of this kind of a path. So that's the first book, and this book, The Practice Path, will be the second book in this series. So we made a little flyer for the teachers up at the Lay Zen Teachers Association meeting we were just at last weekend, and they were extremely enthusiastic about the prospect of this series of books. So we're looking forward to that.
So I think there's something to be said for including the voices that are not often heard, the voices of students. And not just the voices of students, but in dialogue and how things meet. If we follow Dogen's suggestion that the mind of awakening is intimacy with all things, and Huining, with the Platform Sutra, there's actually no Buddha, there's only Buddha activity, then how are we going to see how that actually moves today? So you're helping.
And it's a natural extension of inquiry.
And this is a natural extension of inquiry, which is one of our other teaching functions here, how we relate to each other in a deep and intimate way. It also is an expression of something quite traditional that's talked about in our practice, which is usually termed way-seeking mind. What is this mind that seeks the way? And what is the way that this mind and heart seeks? It's another kind of interesting koan, isn't it, to sit with? And in traditional temples, if you were to go to Austin Zen Center, Houston, San Francisco, the Soto lineages that we know and the places we've taught, students will be asked to give a talk. Peg and I did them, and some of you in this room have done them. I know Betty has probably, and others probably, Bill, where you talk, the way-seeking mind is where you basically give your spiritual history. How did I come to be sitting here? What called me? And that's the stepping stone tonight. It's what called you to practice. The first chapter is the call to practice. And I think I've already put some of my draft of my writing up on that, right? Some of you seen it? And I base it on that first little verse that in some ways is the first thing that you hear every morning in a temple or a monastery because of what's written on the Han. And most of you are familiar, have heard us talk about this wooden plank. It's usually hung by a rope, and there's a mallet, and it's struck. And it makes a loud sound. The little roll down. And it's that sound that we replicate every morning with the clappers, but it doesn't disturb the neighbors. But when you're in a big monastery, you want to disturb everyone because it gets them up. There's a bell, but that's what actually calls you. And there's a certain sequence in which those strikes are done. What I just did was the first roll down. At the end of that last one, and I go, boom, that says you have how many more minutes at that point?
Well, usually the whole thing is
15 minutes, and so it goes 7 minutes, first roll down, 5 more minutes, second roll down. You better be in your seat then, because those last 3 minutes is when the priest comes in. Now that's formal. Even when I just say that, notice what happens in your body. You're like, ooh, like this is the real stuff. But what's on the Han, when it's struck, it's right on the face of it. It's usually, there's an inscription, so when it's hit, it's as if this message is sent out with that loud sound every single time. And this past weekend, as Peg mentioned, we were at the San Francisco Zen Center at the Lay Zen Teachers Association meeting. And it's the temple in which I did most of my training. But Peg had never been inside. So I took her downstairs. The Zendo is in what looks kind of like a basement. It's on the hill, so actually the basement has windows on one side. And I took her up to the Han, the one that I learned to use and the one I had done many, many times in Sesshin. And there it was. Great is the matter of birth and death. All is impermanent, quickly passing. Awake, awake, don't waste this life. And so that's basically the first thing you're hearing every morning. Great is the matter of birth and death. All is impermanent, quickly passing. Awake, awake, don't waste this life. And it runs out. Ends. So the primary question tonight is to talk about, and for you to begin to reflect on, what brought you to this path? What called you? What made you, and some of you that have read the story that I use in the beginning of the chapter, you hear the painfully difficult and silly way in which, in some ways, I decided I would embark on the path. But it's the way I've always done everything. Thinking it wouldn't be too difficult and I would know what I was doing and I could always manage it no matter what. Because I was always successful at things that were sort of achievement-oriented and competency-based. I was good at that. I just didn't realize then it was not about either of those things. But what do you bring to the path? You. And every habit, and then you get to see them. And I got to see mine the first day that I showed up in a Zen temple at Green Gulch Farm, which is a beautiful, beautiful temple. And the temperature that it is outside right now is about what it was in the Zendo, because there's no heat. And it's in a valley that goes down to Muir Beach in Marin County, and it's cold all the time. And I thought it was going to be this fantastic day, finally in a beautiful Zen temple with a Zen teacher, and I would finally sit in a great place, and it was hideous. You know, how many of you, the first time you sat a full day sitting, went, now why did I think this is a good idea? And, you know, a lot of hands. It's like, really? This was supposed to be like a good thing? Let alone a 10-day Vipassana retreat, or, you know, or then you really know you've done the wrong thing. It's like, wow, this is really hard. And as I said in the writing, which you'll see, the most shocking thing was as soon as I left, I was thinking about how to go back. But that's the question. Why? Why was I called to do that? Why would I want to? But the more interesting thing is, why would you want to? Because there's a story with every single one of you in here that has brought you to practice. Whether you've done it formally, informally, steadily, intermittently, whether you've just started, whether you've never really practiced much, you mainly just read, but you like classes. Everyone has a particular story about this. The verse of the Han I use most frequently in memorial services. Because what calls us in is also clarifying what's going to shepherd us out. Because what's the first line? Great is the matter of what? Birth and death. Great is the matter of birth and death. It's the primary thing that we face. And much of what happens in between is our intention and our deep resolve to clarify that mystery. And it's a mystery, not to answer it, to clarify it. Not to solve it, to clarify it. So here's another question for you. What's the difference between clarifying the mystery and solving a problem or answering a question? You feel the difference? It's a very different thing. How do you become intimate with it and penetrate the mystery? To clarify the mystery, so the mystery gets clear, not the answer gets clear. It's a very different kind of path that we go along. So I'll often use it in funerals or memorial services. Because just the sound, there's something about the sound, isn't there? Which is part of Zen practice. It's very embodied. And it's very sensory. And it's something that calls you below the mind, even though the stories like the koans that we hear, or the exchanges between ancient disciples and students, or some of the philosophical writings seem so abstruse and difficult and complex, and so we think, wow, Zen is really intellectual. It's not intellectual at all. Not, the writings about Zen are, Zen isn't. If you go to a temple in Japan, I'll give you another story that I didn't write. Maybe I'll write it. I was in Kyoto with a friend of mine who had been practicing at a temple in Japan. We had been on a month-long intensive in another city, and we were back in Kyoto having a little fun. And that means like eating fancy tofu. You know? Actually, that day I went to a restaurant in which I had a 5-course meal. Every course was tofu. And it was amazing. It was really quite incredible. And she said, I want you to go to, I hate to say it, Tofukuji. It's not about tofu, but it is one of the most incredible temples I've ever seen. It's enormous. It has the longest wooden footbridge in Japan over this gorge that is full of these beautiful rocks and Japanese maples and greenery. At the Kaisando, which is the name that's used for the Founders Hall, in a full temple or monastery, there's usually an entire building dedicated to the founder of that temple. And you may have actually seen photographs, because there are these beautiful stones they've cut by hand that are square, about this big, and they're not laid out right next to each other. They're laid out here and there. They're in a grid, but they're not solid. And the rest of it is grass, except when it snows. And then there are azalea bushes that were blooming at that particular time. It was just dreamy. So we go up to the temple, and we go into the first little area, which is that place that's neither inside nor outside, where you take off your shoes. So you go in so you can take off your shoes, but you're not in yet. There's another gate. You knock on the door. Our host, who's bringing us there, there's about 5 of us, says, we'd like to have a tour of the temple, see the abbot. They say, he's not here right now, you have to wait. So, okay. So we step back, and our host says, let's walk across the bridge, let's see the other buildings, we'll wait around. So we do that, it's quite beautiful. We come back, and just as we're about to go through this gate in a wall, this limousine pulls up, literally, and he says, duck. So we have to go like back to the gate, because we're not supposed to be out there if the abbot comes in. We wait for a little while. He said, okay, it's fine now. So we go back to the entry thing, take our shoes off again, knock. Can we come in? No, you need to wait a little longer. I'm not quite ready. And we wait just a few minutes, and finally said, you can come on in. So we go in, and we're ushered into this small room. And he said, just wait, because now it's time for the abbot to see his students. And so you'll need to wait. So we hear in the background these bells ringing, and people coming back and forth, and we're waiting and waiting. Well, this is actually an enactment of what happens in the traditional temples. You don't get in because you want to get in. There's a little test. You know, how long are you going to wait? And then they said, okay, but you can't really see the abbot yet. You'll need to sit first, because now it's time for zazen. So they file us into the zendo, and we're sitting there, and I asked someone, how long is the sitting period? You know, they said it's 50 minutes, 50 minutes. And so we go in, and it's an Rinzai temple, so we're facing out. We're not facing the wall. We're sitting there, and suddenly, the guy comes in with the big stick and starts walking up and down. And he pounds these guys. You know, these are men, young men. And I pretty much know they're not going to hit me, because we're guests. But he did come by and slap the zabuton next to me, the guy next to me, really loud. Wham! It's like, I've never been so awake for 50 minutes in my entire life. Sort of heart-pounding awake. And then finally it's over, and we file out, and we're trying to make sure we're filing. And I'm at the end of the line, because I'm one of the guests, so we're behind the monks, and I'm the tallest. So So as we go down these corridors now in the outside that are covered walkways, they're turning off the lights. Well, I can't see. Guess how high the beams are? About here. So I'm like, boom. I keep hitting them because I can't see. More tests. Then we finally get to the, get inside and they say, just come into this room. Now we go into a room with big sofas. And the abbot finally comes to see us. And he's quite gracious. But I tell this long story because the barriers are sometimes external, like that, and sometimes they're even sort of studied and on purpose, but mostly they're internal. Because you know there's the times that you've sought connection or sought entrance to the mystery and been denied, but mostly it hasn't been from the outside, has it? It's mostly been your own concerns, your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own fears and terrors. But to continue to ask, to continue to request, to continue to meet what Suzuki Roshi would call your inmost request, it calls you forward. At the end of that meeting, by the way, with the abbot there at Tofukuji, he's a master of calligraphy, and his calligraphy is so famous that they put it on cookies. And so he gave us each a little box of cookies to take with us that had his calligraphy on it. And one of the things in Japan, if you've never been there, if you're a guest and you're leaving, they wave at you until you're completely out of sight. They don't say goodbye and turn their back. No one turns their back. So he was waving as we went through this giant hall, big hall. He's waving, waving, waving. And it's just about the time we get out the door, I hear him say, take a bite out of my mind. The cookie, in his calligraphy. Take a bite out of my mind. So he didn't say, remember what I said, learn what I taught. He said, digest. Take in, make it part of your blood. So this is what we're going to be doing, hopefully, with each other, is sharing at this deep level. Here's the sequence, how it's going to go. First month, call to practice, the Han. Great is the matter of birth and death. All is impermanent, quickly passing. Awake, awake, no oasis lies. The second month, okay, we've been called, so it's like, okay, clarifying the way. Now, this may not seem like the clarification for you, but it is for me. What is it that we chant in the morning that we call the confession of repentance? You know that one? How does it start? All my ancient twisted karma, from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion, born through body, speech, and mind, I now fully avow. So this clarifies the way. Once we're on the path, once we can't believe we're doing it, we can't even believe we're going back for more, then what we're asked to do is like, look at ourselves and admit every single thing about ourselves. That begins to really clarify the way. Who is it that's stepping on the path? What is this way-seeking mind? What is our deep intention? How does it accord with the Buddha's way? And we start by saying, all my ancient twisted karma. Another translation we've seen is, all my tangled karma of old. All the causes and conditions that brought me here. And we'll go through this more. From beginningless, not our lifetime, greed, hate, and delusion, it's a condition of life, but that I bear, born through body, speech, and mind, I now fully make a confession. I now fully avow. I admit it. This is me. And that clarifies the way, because what do you work with in practice? Your mind, your body, your life, your heart. And if you're going to be called by this great mystery, and you're going to have to make this U-turn straight into your own heart, then where are you going to rest? And so month 3 is profound acceptance, not judgment, not am I okay? And profound acceptance is expressed in the refuge. refuges. Where am I going to take refuge? If this is me and I'm called, then where do I rest? Where do I find my place to turn to? So I take refuge in Buddha, teacher, or the truth. I take refuge in Dharma, the teachings, or the way things really are and the way they move. And I take refuge in Sangha, the community of people that are called to move in this way. So I know that there is some truth, some teaching, some group of people that will hold me in this place I've now turned. And that I can meet and can give me some reflection. This is what we embody. So that now I can actually penetrate the heart of practice, which is the core of the Buddha's teaching, which is the Four Noble Truths. And we chant that here by saying what? Caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering. Holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher, being just this moment, compassion's way. So we begin to look at the whole centerpiece. Now that I've been called, I turn towards, I know what I can count on, and then I'm going to do the work. I'm going to take a look at dukkha, the unsatisfactoriness that comes with being alive. Not because it's a problem, but because a life contains everything it contains. I'm going to look at the ways that I respond, how my response to dukkha begins to shape who I am and how I respond to the world. I'm going to look at how I can contain and work with how I respond and how that can move in a path, eightfold path, as compassion, as wisdom. And as I work with that, it becomes part of my cells. That's when we begin to digest things deeply. It becomes part of my bones. I begin to take it on. So that the next month is embodying the teachings. And the embodiment we chant as the robe chant, the traditional robe chant, which is what we do after Zazen, right? So let's do that then. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teachings, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. The robe of liberation is vast. A formless field of benefaction. The most beautiful line, I think. A formless field of benefaction. And that these are teachings to wear, to get in our body, not just to learn. And when they penetrate, then we come forward in this way. And once we begin to get this in us, then we're prepared in a way to offer ourselves back to the world in the service of all beings. And that's the Bodhisattva vow, which we now chant in the beginning in the mornings. The form that we use, once again, say it with me if you want, but beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. And Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to become it. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to become it. May our intentions equally permeate every being in place with the true merit of Buddha's way. So now we found our Buddha's way. And that way, expressed continuously, lifetime after lifetime, was taught to us on the Buddha's deathbed when he said, carry forward, what do we do? Carry forward with appamada, with diligent care. So this just kind of lays out the path for you, starting with the strike on the Han, calls you to practice, that kind of awakens the way-seeking mind so that we can begin to move together. So here's the warning label on the package. So like on the pack of cigarettes, you know? that whole sequence is an illusion. It doesn't really work that way. And yet, for us to have a coherent, satisfying, enlivening way to begin to move, that also is kind of stimulating and encouraging. It makes sense, doesn't it? It has an unfolding like the petals of a flower, like the lotus. So it can be looked at that way. And when you came in the first time to practice and you wondered, what the heck is this? Even though I seem to want to do it, would it have helped if someone laid out something that looked like it had some meaning? Would that have helped you? For some people it would, not everyone. So we'll use the illusion as if it were true and see what we can get from it and see how we can express it and see how we can learn from it. Actually, all of it happens at once. But we play like it's a linear sequence to help ourselves move along. So you willing to go along for the ride? With the illusion, it's an illusion. Because it's a beautiful one. And it's a useful one. And it's a wholesome one. And it's an intimate one. And most of all, it's doable. So in terms of our direction and our first step today, do you have questions or concerns? Things that you'd like to ask or bring up in response to what I've said so far? It's that clear, huh? Or that abstract or difficult? I'll say one more thing. You know, I invited you to take the self-assessment tool on self-compassion. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do the scoring on those, but we're not going to talk about it right away. It's just a curiosity based on this wonderful work that Kristen Knapp is doing at the University of Texas on self-compassion to begin to sort of tap in and access a little bit of your own reflection on your own practice and your own relation to yourself. If you look at the heart of practice, that last line, when we talk about each moment, life as it is the only teacher, being just this moment, compassion's way. And then how compassionate are you to yourself? And we'll take a look at some of the results. And I'll also probably give it to you again at the end. Not to look for progress or anything, but just to have you reflect on yourself again, just to see kind of how you are. And no questions, no struggles at this point, huh?
Is it okay if we do our form in a day if we're not done tonight?
Oh yeah, the self-assessment form you can do any time in the next week or so, it's fine. You don't have to do it right away. You don't have to do it at all, it's just an invitation. But I think it'd be interesting for us. There's some, this is the psychologist in me. There's some subscales on this particular assessment, on self-acceptance, and that are very interesting. So we'll take a look at that information as a group, and then you can get some individual feedback as well. But if you do it relatively soon, then we have kind of a pre-assessment. I'll offer myself wholeheartedly in response to these steps. And then I'll thank you in advance for any response that you're willing to give. Because I think this can be a really important document for others and students, and a totally different step in what's available for people. Yeah, sure.
So like a group of older folks with calcified brains, not technology enabled.
This is the technology question, right?
Which is a wonderful part of the practice of this class.
That's why I wrote what I did ahead of time about the challenge.
So maybe if there was an email or posting that kind of went back on the basics, all right, how do we get signed up for this wiki? What?
How about if we do that in person tonight,
Awesome.
so that you don't have to worry about that? I wanted to get to the real content of the class and then spend a little bit of time with that, so that the questions that you have, because the quicker we can answer all of those questions, then that's not where we have to put our energies any longer. And we'll be happy to do that. And I think in the email I sent yesterday, I pretty much gave you instructions on how to do it. And so it should be fairly clear. But there's a couple of little things that if you don't do, will hang you up. So we'll spell some of those out. And then the people that don't have the ability to be right here with us, the people who are going to see this, wherever they are, then maybe this will help you guys too. Other questions? Okay, let's spend the next 15 minutes writing. And I'm not going to give you any particular instructions, but I will give you some guidelines.
I think someone had a tablet now.
Yeah, we have tablets. Don't assume that what you're doing when you're writing is an assignment. This isn't a writing assignment, and this is not English class. This is not a theme, it's not an essay, it's not a term paper. It's more like a journal. Or more like just your first thoughts. I followed some of the instructions of Natalie Goldberg for a while, so because I was so afraid to do any kind of writing. And you're not writing for me, you're writing for yourself. You may not share a darn thing with me or anybody else, you don't have to. But if you want to, that would be fine. Natalie Goldberg would sometimes start the first line at the top of the page. This is the shittiest thing anyone's ever written. Sorry about the language, but it's like, okay, just start with that. Okay, it doesn't have to be, this isn't about good. Sometimes just putting your pen down and beginning, it begins to unfold because you write your way into something you didn't even know you knew. It finds you. And this is one of the ways for your way-seeking mind to gain a voice. This is one of the ways for your intention to be expressed. So this will be in some ways a meditative period of silence, and we'll write until the bell.
Are you saying something before we write?
I just did for about half an hour.
Wait.
I'm gonna.
Did you say a topic or something? I was getting this pad and maybe I missed one important sentence.
I'll read what I put on class 1 as a prompt, because some of you may not have seen it. If you go, when you get on the wiki, when you go to class 1, there's a thing called Flint's draft. You'll see what I wrote. And then it'll say a forum. And then the forum is like a little blog post. And under it, comment. So people can start posting what they write or talk. Here's what I wrote on that. How do you feel called to practice? What does it mean to step onto the path? Each of us has a story about what prompted us to begin to meditate, to visit a practice center, or to participate in this class. There are as many stories as there are seats in the meditation hall. You might pause for a moment and reflect on what is calling you now. What is your inmost request? Can you hear in the spacious stillness of silent sitting that still, small voice that has something to say, that is most often drowned out in the noisy chaos of everyday life? If you do hear it, how do you typically respond? Do you turn toward that voice to hear it more clearly and follow it more intimately? Or do you turn away from it and ignore it? What are your habits of refusing life? Are you willing to study the ways you turn away from life as it is? So that's a lot. And you'll be able to find it. It's right there for you. You can go back to it. You can take these sentences and write as much as you want. But just write what's there now. back on, Cassie? Okay. Anybody have a sentence or two they want to read out loud? Just something that, one little something that stood out, that, that it may have surprised yourself, or that you didn't realize, or that shone a light somewhere. It's certainly not required, but if you feel, Rupesh?
One sentence?
Whatever. The problem is they won't be able to hear you, so I'm going to have to repeat it.
Okay. Then there was Mandy's face after she sat attending a Vipassana course. She was a tightly wound ex-girlfriend. Her face was full of ease and light. I knew then that I had to go.
Her face was full of ease and light. I knew then I'd have to go. How many of you in here have sat a retreat longer than 3 days? Okay, you don't have to raise your hands about the next question. How many of you have fallen in love with someone you didn't even talk to in the retreat? And wasn't the breakup painful? And the relationship you were not in? Anyone else willing to risk one sentence? Or a word you didn't expect to use? Rick?
Well, actually, I've talked a lot about this at inquiry, but how I refused life,
How I refuse life.
I always thought I operated from fear, but then I realized it was total self-judgment.
So not so much fear, but self-judgment.
Yeah, because then, and why, I never understood the why part, but the why was, I learned how to do the self-judgment better than anybody else could so that they would stay off my ass.
You learn to self-judge better than the outside judges
Yeah,
as a self-protection.
yeah.
Yeah, so you begin to learn how these parts arise. Yeah. And this is one of the things, some of you have heard me say this, is one of the reasons I think this kind of work together is so useful, is because as a psychotherapist, I've seen people do beautiful work in psychotherapy and understand a whole lot about themselves and have a tremendous insight, but get sort of locked in these cycles of self-reflection and self-identification that they don't know how to step off of. And then I've been in temples and monasteries where I've seen people sit with great diligence and have a good understanding of the Dharma, and they watch all this stuff arise and have not a clue about what to do with what they see arise. But if you put those two things together, a capacity to witness all that arises and develop and practice the courage to turn toward, and then have this sort of Western upaya, skillful means of working with that which arises to help it relax and be seen through instead of just seen and lived with and as, you have a place to begin to open to Buddhism. We begin to see Buddha's way. You begin to see what Dogen meant about to study the Buddha ways, to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by the myriad things. When actualized by the myriad things, mind and body of self and other drop away. And see this opening, this profound opening by studying. But not as studying to say, oh, well, I'm this way because. To begin to step beyond and then to come back with a lot of freedom. So here's my request. As you take what you started tonight and the questions that you'll find on the wiki, that longer thing that I read, and write whatever you like, if you feel like writing. I think that you'll find that writing can be a profound practice. It's challenging for a lot of us. Maybe it's not that much fun sometimes, but neither is sitting sometimes, but it equally potent. In fact, in the Lay Zen teachers meeting this past weekend in San Francisco, one of the primary teaching themes that arose was the power of writing as a practice in modern life. was one of the primary things that came up as contemporary practice paths. And there's some awfully good writers. Some of you know Wendy Johnson, who does the gardening column in Tricycle, and she was there. Sally Chico Tisdale, who you see writing in Tricycle Buddha Dharma, she was in the meeting, and on and on and on. Yeah, Jisho Warner, Susan Moon, who just wrote a beautiful book on aging in Buddhism called This is Getting Old. And Peter Levitt, who has been working with Kaz Tanahashi on translation of the Shobogenzo, Dogen's primary teachings. I mean, this is serious.
2 massive volumes.
His life's work. You know, these were amazing people, and they're saying, you know, everyday writing practice and writing practice like this with each other can open us. It's not like a secondhand practice. So spend some time if you'd like. You can place your writings on the forum. You can send them to me directly. Those are the 2 main places I would assume they would best be placed. If you put them on the forum, then your friends can read them, and maybe they'll comment. If you're shy about that, don't worry about it. Just send them to me. Or if you're even more shy, you don't have to send them to anyone. Just let them be your practice. Okay. Did you have a particular question about the wiki? If you are not already a member, and many of you are, and you may not know it, you will have gotten an email that said, join. And there's a little link there, right? If you follow the link, you go right to the logon page. It'll ask you for your password. You create a password, you log on. Then a screen will come up, and on the left-hand side, there'll be a bunch of information. If you don't log on, it won't open to that.
Are we supposed to get an email that invites?
Yeah, if you didn't,
Betty, you're already on the wiki, so you won't get an email invitation.
yeah, some of you already have gained permission through other means, and so you won't have gotten one.
If you're on the Appamada email list, most likely you have a wiki account. So at some point, you've responded to the original invitation and set up a password. That's what you need to use to log in. So I made a card that has the URL for the class homepage. And the way to log in is to take the first part of that URL, which just is appamada.pbworks.com. Just go to that, and you'll have the login page. So then you just log in, and then you'll be able to see the folder, which is not visible to anyone does not have permission to access from the class.
That URL was the one thing I found missing from these instructions. I feel somewhat lost in what seems to be a profusion of Appamada websites.
Yes.
And I had searched through my emails for a while to find that
Yeah.
URL.
Yeah, I didn't have it in my letter, that's true. I didn't have it in there.
There's a card here. It's the basic URL is Appamada.
You can turn that off.
Appamada.pbworks